Everyone mocked her firewood stockpile, until they discovered the real reason. Elizabeth Carter had endured her neighbors' malicious comments for nearly 2 years. Every day she stacked more and more firewood on her property, spending practically her entire retirement on that activity, which seemed pointless to any outside observer. It was on a cold May morning that everything began to get even more complicated. The inspector from the Aspen City Hall knocked on her door with a serious expression and a clipboard full of papers. "Mrs. Elizabeth, we have received several complaints about the irregular accumulation of combustible material on your property," said Michael Thompson, adjusting his glasses as he observed the enormous piles of firewood organized with military precision in her backyard. Elizabeth felt her heart race. Her trembling hands held the door firmly, as if that gesture could protect her from what was to come. "But sir, this firewood is mine. I bought it all with my own money," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the nervousness taking over her body. "I understand, but there is a municipal ordinance that limits the amount of flammable material that can be stored in residences. You have far more than is permitted," explained the inspector, pointing to the dozens of rows of carefully stacked wood. The man walked around the property, counting and taking notes. Elizabeth followed a few steps behind, watching his every move with growing anxiety. She knew that amount really did draw attention. There were at least 500 logs of hardwood, all cut to the exact size, organized by type and quality. "How long do I have to comply with the ordinance?" she asked, already imagining the answer would not be comforting. 30 days to reduce it by at least 70%. Otherwise, we will have to apply a $2,000 fine and a compulsory removal order," replied Michael, handing her an official paper with all the details of the violation. When the inspector left, Elizabeth sat on one of the wood piles and cried. They were not tears of common anger or frustration. It was the despair of someone who knew her life's mission was being threatened, but could not explain it to anyone without compromising everything she had built over 20 years. That same afternoon her phone rang. It was David, her only son, calling from New York with a troubled voice. "Mum, what is this story I'm hearing about you hoarding firewood like a crazy person?" His voice sounded impatient, as it always did when he talked about his mother's habits he couldn't understand. "David, it's not what you're thinking," Elizabeth tried to explain, but was interrupted. "Not what, Mom?" "Mrs. Barbara called me saying you spend your whole retirement buying wood and that the city is taking action against you. What is this about?" Elizabeth took a deep breath. David had always been a practical man, focused on numbers and results. Ever since he graduated in business and opened his own consulting firm, he saw the world only through spreadsheets and profits. Explaining the true reason for so much effort to him would be impossible. "Son, you don't need to worry about this. It's just a misunderstanding with the city," she said, trying to sound calm. "A misunderstanding? Mom, you're 62 and live alone. What do you need so much firewood for? What will people think?" His question hurt more than she cared to admit. David had always worried too much about what others thought, especially after he started moving in higher social circles in the capital. His mother's eccentricity embarrassed him. "I need this firewood, David. I can't explain right now, but you need to trust me," she pleaded. "I can't trust you when you act irrationally. I'm traveling there this weekend, and we are going to sort this situation out. You're going to get rid of all that firewood, and we're going to talk about you moving to an apartment here in New York." The call ended before Elizabeth could protest. She stared at the phone, feeling her life crumbling. First the inspector, now her son. Everyone wanted her to abandon her project, but no one was interested in understanding why she was so committed. For the rest of the week, Elizabeth barely slept. She walked through the yard in the early morning hours, running her hand over each log as if saying goodbye to old friends. Each piece of wood there represented hours of work, saving and planning. More than that, each one had a specific destination and a family that depended on it. On Thursday, a storm hit the region with unusual force for the time of year. Winds of over 50 miles per hour knocked down trees and tore roofs off houses. The makeshift cover protecting part of Elizabeth's firewood didn't hold. Dozens of logs were exposed to the torrential rain, and some were scattered across the property. Dear listener, If you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Elizabeth was soaked, trying to reorganize the wet firewood when her neighbor Barbara appeared at the fence dividing their properties. "Oh, Elizabeth, what a mess! Did you see how chaotic it got?" Barbara commented, but there was something in her voice that wasn't exactly sympathy. "Yes, Barbara, I'm going to have to call someone to fix the cover," Elizabeth replied, continuing her work without stopping. "Don't you think this is a sign that it's time to stop this obsession?" Barbara hesitated in her choice of word, but her tone made her thoughts clear. Elizabeth stopped working and looked at her neighbor. They had known each other for 15 years, since Elizabeth moved into that house after being widowed. Barbara had always been a good person at heart, but she also had a habit of meddling in other people's lives. "Barbara, you've known me a long time. Have you ever seen me do anything without a reason?" asked Elizabeth, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, no, but Elizabeth, you have to admit this isn't normal. A woman your age, alone, spending all your money on firewood. People are talking." "And what are people saying?" Elizabeth wanted to know, though she was sure she wouldn't like the answer. "That you're getting, a bit out of touch with things, that you might need medical help. Your David shouldn't let you live alone." Barbara's words hit Elizabeth like a punch in the stomach. That was exactly what she feared. People were starting to question her mental sanity simply because they didn't understand her actions. And the worst part was, she couldn't defend herself by explaining the truth. "Barbara, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly sound of mind. I have my reasons for everything I do," said Elizabeth, trying to end the conversation. "All right, Elizabeth, but you can count on me if you need anything, right?" Barbara moved away from the fence, but Elizabeth could tell she wasn't convinced. In the afternoon, Elizabeth called Robert, a local handyman who had done some work on her house before. "Robert, I need you to come look at the cover that fell in the storm. I need it fixed urgently," she said. "Of course, Mrs. Elizabeth, but you know it's going to be expensive, right? Materials are through the roof right now," Robert warned. "How much do you think it will cost?" "Well, it's hard to say without seeing it properly, but it won't be less than $800. And that's if the structure isn't too damaged." Elizabeth felt her heart race again. $800 was almost half of her pension. Combined with the possible fine from the city, she would be in a very difficult financial situation, but she had no choice. "All right, Robert, come take a look tomorrow morning." That night, Elizabeth opened the drawer of the dresser where she kept her documents and pulled out her latest bank statement. She had exactly $1,300 in her account. If she paid for the roof repair, only $500 would be left to get through the month. And there was still the issue of the fine and the pressure to get rid of the firewood. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and looked out the window at her backyard. Even in the darkness, she could see the outlines of the piles of firewood that had cost her so much sweat. Each log there represented much more than wood to burn. They were silent promises, commitments made without anyone knowing, dreams of warming hearts beyond houses. On Friday, Robert arrived early to assess the damage. Elizabeth accompanied him as he examined the damaged structure. "The situation isn't good, Mrs. Elizabeth. 3 beams broke and the corrugated roofing tore in several places. You'll need to replace almost everything," he explained, shaking his head. "And how much would it be to replace everything?" "About $1,200, including materials and labor." Elizabeth felt her legs go weak. $1,200 was more than her entire pension. "Robert, I don't have all that money right now. Would you do it in installments?" "Mrs. Elizabeth, you know I have the utmost respect for you, but I'm going through difficulties too. My daughter is in the hospital and I need the money up front." Robert seemed genuinely embarrassed that he couldn't help. "I understand, Robert. Let me see what I can do." After Robert left, Elizabeth stood in the backyard for almost an hour, just looking at her firewood and trying to think of a solution. She could sell some logs, but that would mean leaving families unprotected during the approaching winter. She could borrow money from David, but he would use that as another reason to question her about the whole situation. That's when she had an idea she had never considered before. She could work to earn extra money. It had been a long time since she'd done that, but she still had the energy and experience in cleaning and organizing houses. The following Monday, Elizabeth put on her best clothes and went out to look for work as a house cleaner. The first house she visited was Mrs. Martha's, a middle-class lady who lived in the city centre. "Look, Elizabeth, I could actually use someone, but don't you think you're a little, how can I say, past the age for this kind of work?" Martha hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mrs. Martha, I'm 62, not 90. I still have plenty of energy and experience," Elizabeth replied with dignity. "It's not a question of capability, it's that, well, shouldn't you be retired resting?" Elizabeth realized that for many people in town, seeing her looking for work as a house cleaner would confirm the theories that she was having financial or mental problems because of her obsession with the firewood. After trying 3 more houses with similar responses, Elizabeth managed to convince Mrs. Dorothy, a retired teacher who lived alone, to hire her for 2 days a week. "You really clean well, Elizabeth, because I'm very particular about organization," Dorothy warned. "Mrs. Dorothy, I guarantee you'll be satisfied," Elizabeth replied, relieved to have finally secured an extra source of income. The work was heavy for someone her age, but Elizabeth pushed herself beyond what was necessary. She cleaned every corner of Mrs. Dorothy's house as if it were her own home, organized closets that weren't part of the agreement, and even prepared a special snack for her employer before leaving. "Elizabeth, you are an excellent professional. I'm going to recommend you to 2 more of my friends," said Dorothy after the 3rd week of work. In no time, Elizabeth was working as a house cleaner in 4 different homes, 3 days a week. The extra money temporarily solved her financial problems, but created new challenges. She was exhausted, had less time to care for her firewood, and most importantly needed to hide from David that she was working. One day, while organizing Mrs. Dorothy's closet, Elizabeth found an old photo of the teacher with her students. "Mrs. Dorothy, how many years did you teach?" asked Elizabeth, admiring the photograph. 42 years, my dear. I taught 3 generations of the same family in some cases," Dorothy replied with pride. "And don't you miss it?" "Every day. But you know how it is, right? You retire and suddenly you have no purpose anymore. You're just waiting for time to pass." Dorothy sighed. Elizabeth stopped cleaning and looked at the woman in front of her. Dorothy was 70 years old and had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 years earlier. She understood perfectly the feeling of having no purpose in life anymore. "Mrs. Dorothy, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Elizabeth." "Have you ever done something that people thought was strange, but that made sense to you?" Dorothy chuckled softly. "My dear, I have an entire room full of schoolwork from my students over the last 40 years. Essays, drawings, projects. My daughter is always saying I should throw it all away, that it's silly to keep old paper. But each one of those pieces of work represents a child who passed through my life." Elizabeth smiled. It was the first time in months she had found someone who might understand her reasons. "People don't understand when we do something with our heart instead of reason, right, Mrs. Dorothy?" "Exactly, Elizabeth. They want everything to have a logical and practical explanation, but sometimes we do things simply because we need to, because it's part of who we are." That conversation gave Elizabeth a feeling of relief she hadn't felt in a long time. Even without sharing details about her firewood, she felt understood. At the end of June, David arrived for his promised visit. Elizabeth hadn't told him about the house cleaning job or about the problems with the city hall, which she had managed to postpone for another 30 days. "Mum, you look tired," were the first words David said as he hugged her. "I'm fine, son. It's just age catching up," Elizabeth lied. "And this mess with the city hall, is it resolved?" "I'm still negotiating with them." David walked through the backyard, observing the piles of firewood with a disapproving expression. "Mom, this place has turned into a lumber yard. Are you sure you're okay in the head?" The direct question hurt more than Elizabeth had expected. Seeing her own son questioning her mental sanity was devastating. "David, I've told you I'm fine. I have my reasons for all this." "What reasons, Mom? You live alone. You have a small fireplace you use maybe twice a year. Why do you need 500 logs of firewood?" "I can't explain right now, but—" "You can't explain," David interrupted, his tone changing. "Mom, you spend your entire pension buying wood. You're being sued by the city hall. The neighbors are saying you're getting senile, and you can't explain." David, please. No, Mom. Enough. We're going to settle this once and for all. Either you properly explain to me what's going on, or I'm going to arrange for you to come live with me in New York and put this house up for sale. Elizabeth felt she had reached her limit. David's threat to sell her house and force her to move was the worst possible scenario. Without the house and without the firewood, she couldn't continue helping the families who depended on her. David, I beg you to trust me for a few more months. I promise everything will make sense. A few months, Mum? You've been acting this strange way for 2 years. How much longer do you think I can pretend everything is normal? The argument intensified throughout the weekend. David threatened several times to call a doctor to evaluate his mother's mental capacity. Elizabeth cried, begged, and tried every possible way to buy more time without revealing her secret. If you don't give me a convincing explanation by Monday, I will start the procedures for you to move to New York, was David's ultimatum before returning to the capital. Elizabeth spent the entire Sunday walking in the backyard, touching her firewood, and wondering if the time had come to tell her son everything. But she knew David wouldn't understand. He would see it as exaggerated sentimentality, or worse yet as confirmation that she really was losing her lucidity. On Monday morning, while Elizabeth was working at Mrs. Dorothy's house, an unexpected visitor appeared. Lucas Harrison, a young journalist from the local newspaper, had heard about the Firewood woman and decided to investigate the story. "Mrs. Elizabeth?" he asked when she opened the door of Mrs. Dorothy's house. "I am Elizabeth, but I don't live here. I work here," she replied suspiciously. "Sorry to bother you. I'm Lucas, a journalist from the Mountain Tribune. I would like to talk to you about your firewood collection." Elizabeth felt her blood run cold. This was exactly what she feared most. If her story became news, everything would be ruined. "Young man, I have nothing to say to a journalist," she said, trying to close the door. "Please, Mrs. Elizabeth, it's not a negative piece. I'm just curious about your story. Many people in town are talking about you." "And what are these people saying?" "Well, some say you're accumulating firewood for no reason, others say you're having problems. But I have the impression there's more to this story." Elizabeth looked at the young man. He seemed sincere, but she couldn't take the risk. "Young man, please don't publish anything about me. I beg you," she said, and Lucas noticed the desperation in her voice. "Why are you so afraid of the press? If you're not doing anything wrong." "It's not a question of doing something wrong. It's complicated." Elizabeth hesitated. Lucas realized there was something much deeper in that story than simple eccentricity or mental health problems. "Mrs. Elizabeth, may I ask you a question? You organized your firewood in a very specific way, didn't you? As if each piece had a certain destination." Elizabeth was startled by the young man's perceptiveness. "How do you know that?" "I passed by your house a few times and noticed the firewood has small labels. It seems like a very detailed organizational system for someone who is just accumulating wood for no reason." At that moment, Elizabeth realized that perhaps Lucas was the first person truly interested in understanding her story, instead of simply judging her. "If I agree to talk to you, do you promise not to publish anything without my authorization?" she asked. "I promise." "And if I ask you never to publish anything, would you respect that?" Lucas hesitated. As a journalist, he knew he might be letting a big story slip away, but something in Elizabeth's desperate look touched him. "If it's really necessary to protect someone, I would respect it," he replied. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Perhaps it was time to trust someone. "Then come to my house tonight at 8 o'clock, but come alone and discreetly. If anyone knows you were there, our conversation ends immediately." Lucas agreed. He spent the rest of the day thinking about the mystery he was about to unravel. There was something in Elizabeth's demeanor that indicated a much more complex and moving story than he had initially imagined. At 8 o'clock sharp, Lucas knocked on Elizabeth's door. She received him with evident nervousness, looking around to make sure no one had seen them. "Come in quickly," she said, closing the door behind him. The room was simple but very well organized. Lucas immediately noticed several small cards scattered on the kitchen table, all filled with careful handwriting. First of all, Lucas, I need you to understand one thing. What I'm about to tell you cannot be published in any way, at least not in the way people expect. Why not? Because if people know who I am and what I do, everything will be ruined. The families I help will be embarrassed. Some will refuse to receive help. Others will seek me out when they cannot be assisted. It will become a mess. Lucas was growing increasingly intrigued. Mrs. Elizabeth, what families are these? Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment, as if assessing whether she could really trust the young man. Lucas, for 20 years, I have been distributing free firewood to needy families in the region, discreetly. They don't know who I am or where I live. How so? I map all the families struggling within a 50-kilometer radius of the city. Elderly people living alone, unemployed single mothers, workers who have lost their jobs, sick people who cannot work. During the winter, they receive enough firewood to keep warm throughout the cold season. Lucas fell silent for a few seconds, processing the information. And they don't know it's you? No. I leave the firewood at their door during the early morning hours with a simple note saying to warm the heart. Some think it comes from the city hall, others think it's some kind neighbor. I prefer it that way. Why? Because when you help someone anonymously, the person receives help without embarrassment. They don't feel indebted to anyone. They aren't ashamed. They don't need to thank or justify themselves. It's pure help. Lucas began to understand the scale of the story he was hearing. And how do you find out who needs it? Elizabeth stood up and brought a shoebox full of cards, organized in alphabetical order. Throughout the entire year, I visit these families discreetly. I offer small services, talk to neighbors, go to church, the health clinic, the school. I talk to everyone. When someone mentions that a family is struggling, I investigate discreetly. She showed one of the cards to Lucas. It read, Johnson family, Flower Street 47, father unemployed for 6 months, 3 young children. Cold house, no heating, needs 40 eucalyptus logs. Mrs. Elizabeth, how many families do you help? This year, it will be 87 families. Each will receive enough firewood to last the entire winter. And how much does that cost? Almost my entire pension. I save all year to buy wood. I eat the bare minimum, wear old clothes, don't travel, don't buy anything superfluous. All to ensure no family goes cold. Lucas was genuinely moved. That woman, whom the whole town thought was becoming senile, was actually a silent heroine. How did all this begin? Elizabeth sighed and sat in the chair next to the young man. My husband Richard was a lumberjack. He died 21 years ago from a heart attack. When he was gone, I was lost. I didn't know what to do with my life. The house was full of his tools, of wood he hadn't finished processing. And then, the first winter after he passed, a neighbor mentioned that the Thompson family, over in New District, was very cold because the father had lost his job and they had no money to buy firewood. I took a cart of wood that was Richard's and took it there in the early morning. And then? The next day, Mrs. Thompson's youngest daughter appeared at the market, telling everyone that an angel had left firewood at their door. She was so happy, so moved. That's when I understood I could continue Richard's work in a different way. Elizabeth took an old photo from the shelf and showed it to Lucas. It was her with Richard, both younger, him holding an axe and her standing next to a pile of firewood. Richard always said firewood isn't just wood to burn. It's warmth, it's family gathered together, it's protection against the cold. He was happy when he knew his wood was heating a home where there were children or the elderly. And you continued his work. I started slowly. In the second year, I helped 5 families. In the third year, 10 families. I learned how to identify who really needed help, how to deliver without causing embarrassment, how to calculate the right amount of firewood for each house. Lucas looked again at the cards spread on the table. Each one contained detailed information. Number of people in the family, type of house, room sizes, other available heating sources, financial situation, estimated period of difficulty. This is the work of a professional social worker, he commented. I learned by doing. At first I made some mistakes. I took too much wood to some families and they became suspicious. I took too little to others and it wasn't enough. Over time I learned to calculate just right. And how do you deliver without being seen? I have an old van that belonged to Richard. In the early hours between 2 and 5 in the morning, I load the van and go out to make deliveries. I know every road in the area. I know which streets have barking dogs, which houses have insomniac neighbors. I've never been seen in 20 years. Lucas was impressed with the organization and dedication of that woman. Mrs. Elizabeth, this is incredible. Why don't you want anyone to know? Lucas, have you ever stopped to think how humiliating it is for a family to need charity, especially for men who have always supported the household and suddenly can't even buy firewood to warm their children? That's true. When you receive help anonymously, there's no embarrassment. You don't have to thank, you don't have to explain yourself. You don't owe anyone a favor. It's like a gift from fate, a small miracle that appears when you need it most. Elizabeth got up and went to the window overlooking the backyard. Besides, if people knew who I was, I would be sought out by hundreds of families. I don't have the means to help everyone. I would have to choose who to help and who not to help. That would be terrible. I understand. And why are you telling me? Because my life is being destroyed by judgments and misunderstandings. My own son thinks I'm going crazy. The city wants to fine me. The neighbors say I'm crazy. If I don't do something, they'll force me to stop all this. And what can I do to help? I don't know. Maybe you could write a general article about the importance of helping others, about how small gestures make a difference, without naming names, without details that identify me. Lucas thought for a few minutes. Mrs. Elizabeth, can I make a counter-proposal? What? What if I wrote the article telling your story, but without revealing your identity? I would call you just a resident of Aspen and wouldn't give details about where you live or what you look like. But why? To show that your neighbors are wrong, to show that there is actually a heroine living in their town and they don't even know it, to make people think before judging others. Elizabeth considered the proposal. Do you think that would make a difference? I think so, and mainly, I think your son needs to know who his mother really is. No, Elizabeth reacted immediately. David cannot know, he wouldn't understand. Why not? David is very rational. He would see this as a waste of money, as naivety. He would force me to stop and move me to New York. Lucas realized he had touched a very sensitive point. Mrs. Elizabeth, may I ask you something? Don't you feel lonely living for others without anyone knowing? The question caught Elizabeth by surprise. She remained silent for almost a minute, looking out the windows. Sometimes, she admitted, sometimes I wish someone knew, that someone understood why this is so important to me. But then I remember the smile of the children who find firewood at their door on a cold morning, and I know any loneliness is worth it. Have you ever thought that maybe there are other ways to help these families without having to carry the whole burden alone? How so? What if more people in town knew there was a support network for needy families? What if you weren't the only one doing this, but part of a larger group? Elizabeth had never considered this possibility. But then it wouldn't be discreet anymore. It doesn't have to be less discreet. It can be a group that works anonymously, just like you do. But with more people helping, more families could be assisted, and you wouldn't have to spend your entire pension. The idea intrigued Elizabeth, but she was still hesitant. Lucas, I need to think about all this. It's a lot of change for a person my age. Of course. But in the meantime, can I write the article without revealing your identity? If you really promise that no one will find out who I am, I promise, then it's okay. But I want to read the article before you publish it. Agreed. Lucas said goodbye to Elizabeth with a feeling that he had just met one of the most special people in his life. On the way back home, he couldn't stop thinking about that woman's dedication and how appearances can be deceiving. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up to a call from David. "Mom, have you thought about what we talked about?" His voice sounded impatient. "David, I need a little more time." "More time for what?" "To accumulate more firewood. To give the neighbors more reason to say you need medical help? Please, son, just a few more months." "No, Mom. Next week I'm coming there with a doctor to evaluate you. And depending on what he says, we will take the necessary steps." The call ended and Elizabeth felt time was running out. David was really determined to have her committed or force her to move. She needed a miracle. Dear listener, If you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. 2 days later, Lucas showed up at Elizabeth's house with the draft of the article. "Mrs. Elizabeth," I wrote the article, "I'd like you to read it before I publish it." Elizabeth took the paper and began to read. The title was "The Anonymous Angel of Aspen, the Story of Solidarity No One Knew." The article told the story of a town resident who for 20 years had been helping needy families by providing free firewood during the winter. Lucas described the system of mapping the families, the discreet method of distribution, and the woman's dedication to using practically all her income to maintain the project. "It's very good, Lucas, but I have one concern." "What?" "What if people still figure out it's me?" I was careful not to give any clues that could identify you. I didn't mention your exact age, I didn't talk about the van, I didn't give details about your house or about your husband's passing. Elizabeth agreed, but was still nervous. "When will you publish it?" "Tomorrow in the Friday edition." "And do you think it will generate a lot of reaction?" "Honestly, I think so. It's a very touching story, and Aspen doesn't have many positive news stories like this." On Friday, Elizabeth woke up anxious. She went to the newsstand very early and bought a copy of the Mountain Tribune. Lucas's article was on the front page with a generic photo of stacked firewood. Throughout the day, Elizabeth did not leave the house. She feared someone might connect the article to her. But curiously, no one came questioning. In the afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy called to comment on the report. "Elizabeth, did you see that beautiful article in the paper today? About this woman who helps poor families with firewood?" "Yes, I did, Mrs. Dorothy. I was so moved. Imagine 20 years doing that in secret. What a wonderful person she must be." "Truly. You know what else impressed me? It's that everyone goes around judging others without knowing the true story. How many people out there do good things that no one knows about?" Mrs. Dorothy's observation made Elizabeth feel a little better. Perhaps Lucas was right about the importance of telling her story. On Saturday, Elizabeth had a surprise. A woman she didn't know appeared at her door. "Are you Mrs. Elizabeth Carter?" asked the visitor. Elizabeth felt her heart race. Someone had found out. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Jennifer Thompson. I think you are the person who saved my family 20 years ago." Elizabeth was speechless. Jennifer Thompson was the daughter of the first family she had helped. That girl who talked about the angel at the market. "How did you—" I read the article in the paper and started thinking. I remembered that 20 years ago someone left firewood at our door, right when my father was unemployed. I remembered it was right after my mother talked to a new neighbor who had moved to the back street. Elizabeth didn't know what to say. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, still hesitant. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I'm sure it was you. And I need to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "That firewood saved us. My father had been unemployed for months. We didn't have money even for proper food, let alone firewood. When we found that pile of wood at the door, my father cried. He said God had sent an angel to care for our family." Elizabeth felt her eyes well up. "And you know what happened after?" continued Jennifer. "My father was so moved by that gesture that he decided to look for work even harder. He said he couldn't disappoint the angel who had believed in him. He got a job the following week." "That's good," Elizabeth managed to say. "Mrs. Elizabeth, may I come in so we can talk?" Elizabeth hesitated, but ended up inviting Jennifer inside. "It is you, isn't it? The woman from the newspaper article." Elizabeth sighed and nodded. "Jennifer, I beg you not to tell anyone." "Why not? What you do is beautiful." "Because if people find out, everything will become complicated. Hundreds of families will come here asking for help. I won't be able to help everyone. The families I already help will be embarrassed. I understand, but I need you to know one thing." "What?" "That firewood didn't just warm us during the winter. It changed our family forever. My father was never unemployed for long again. He always said he had to honor the angel's trust. I graduated in education and work with underprivileged children. My two brothers also have good jobs and help other people whenever they can." Elizabeth was moved listening to that. "You planted a seed of kindness in our family that keeps germinating to this day. My children grew up hearing the story of the angel who helped their grandparents, and they also help other people. I didn't know it had been so important." "It was, Mrs. Elizabeth, and I'm sure it was the same with many other families too." The two women talked for over an hour. Jennifer told how that gesture from 20 years ago had influenced her entire life, and how she always taught her children to help others in memory of the wood angel. "May I make a suggestion, Mrs. Elizabeth?" "Of course. What if I helped you? Not with the distribution, to maintain anonymity, but I could contribute financially to buy more wood." "You don't need to, Jennifer, I can manage. But you don't understand, I want to help. For 20 years I wanted to thank the person who saved our family. Now that I've discovered who it is, I want to give back in some way." Jennifer's proposal made Elizabeth reflect on the conversation she had with Lucas. Perhaps it really was possible to expand the project while maintaining anonymity. "How would it work?" "I would deposit money into your account every month. No one would need to know it's for wood, and that way you could help more families, or at least not have to spend all your retirement money." "And you wouldn't tell anyone about me?" "Never. I understand perfectly why you want to keep it secret." Elizabeth accepted Jennifer's proposal. For the first time in 20 years, she would have a partner in her project, even if a silent one. The following Sunday, Lucas appeared at Elizabeth's house with exciting news. "Mrs. Elizabeth, the story had a very good response. The newspaper received dozens of calls from people wanting to know how they could help." "And what did you say?" "That I cannot reveal the person's identity, but that I will investigate whether there is any way for people to contribute while maintaining the project's anonymity." "And is there?" "Well, talking to you and thinking it over, I believe we can create a way for several people to help without compromising your work." "How?" "What if we created a kind of anonymous fund? People who wanted to help would deposit money into a specific account, and you would use that money to buy more wood. No one would know who you are, and you wouldn't know who the donors are." The idea interested Elizabeth, but she still had doubts. What if too much money comes in? Or if people want to know how the money is being used? For the first problem, the answer is simple. More money means more families helped. For the second, we can create a system where you send anonymous reports to the newspaper without revealing the family's names or your identity, but showing how many people were helped. Do you think it would work? I think it's worth trying. Mainly because this could solve your problem with the City Hall and with your son. How so? If you have community support, and if it becomes clear that your work is recognized and valued, neither the City Hall nor your son will be able to treat you as if you were a person with mental problems. Elizabeth realized Lucas was right. Community support could be the key to keeping her project running. All right, let's try. On Monday, Lucas published a second story with the title, "How You Can Help the Anonymous Angel of Aspen." The text explained that several people had contacted the newspaper wanting to contribute to the wood distribution project, and that an anonymous fund would be created to receive donations. The response was immediate and surprising. In 3 days, more than 50 people made deposits into the account created for the project. Business owners, homemakers, retirees, young professionals, people of all ages and social classes wanted to be part of that story of solidarity. Elizabeth was moved to see that in less than a week, the fund had raised almost $5,000, more than she spent in an entire year on wood. "Lucas, this is unbelievable," she said when the young man visited her to tell her about the donations. "It's the power of a well-told story, Mrs. Elizabeth. People want to do good. They just need to know how. And now? What do we do with all this money?" "You could map more families. You could buy better quality firewood. You could even think about other types of help besides firewood." "Other types of help?" "Blankets, winter clothes for children, food baskets for families who are suffering from hunger as well as cold." Elizabeth had never thought of expanding her project in this way, but the idea excited her. "But how would I do all that alone?" "Perhaps it's time to recruit some trusted volunteers, people who agree to work anonymously without seeking recognition." Do you know people like that? I know a few, and I'm sure that among the people who donated money, there are several who would be willing to donate time too. The prospect of expanding the project both frightened and thrilled Elizabeth at the same time. For 20 years she had worked alone, controlling every detail. Accepting help meant sharing responsibilities and trusting other people. Lucas, if I agree to create a volunteer group, do you think you could find people truly committed to discretion? I think so. We can conduct careful interviews and choose only people who understand the importance of maintaining anonymity. All right, let's try. That Thursday, David called Elizabeth again. Mom, did you see these articles in the paper about a woman who distributes firewood? Yes, I did, son. What did you think? Very nice. She must be a special person, Elizabeth replied, curious to see where David was going with this. You know what I thought? I thought that if there are people like that in town, maybe you could get involved in some social work, instead of just accumulating firewood for no reason. Elizabeth almost laughed at the irony of the situation. You think I should get involved in social work? I think it would be good for you. It would give you purpose, put you in touch with other people. It's much better than this strange obsession with firewood. What if I could resolve the firewood situation so it doesn't bother anyone anymore? Would you still force me to move to New York? How would you resolve it? I don't know yet. But what if I could? David hesitated. Mom, the problem isn't just the firewood. The problem is that you're living isolated, without purpose, doing things people don't understand. I worry about you. What if I prove to you that my life has purpose, that what I do makes sense? How would you prove that? Give me a few more weeks. I promise everything will become clear. David sighed. All right, Mom, a few more weeks, but if there's no significant change, you come live with me. Elizabeth hung up the phone with a mix of relief and anxiety. She had bought more time, but now she would need to decide whether to reveal the truth to David or try to resolve everything without him knowing. The next day, Lucas brought 3 people to meet Elizabeth: Mrs. Martha, a 70-year-old retired teacher; John Peter, a 40-year-old businessman who owned a hardware store; and Anne-Marie, a 35-year-old social worker who worked at the City Hall. Mrs. Elizabeth, these 3 people offered to help with the project after reading the articles, Lucas explained. And you understand everything must be done anonymously? Asked Elizabeth. Perfectly, replied Mrs. Martha. In fact, I've done similar things myself. For 40 years as a teacher, I helped dozens of children by buying school supplies, snacks, sometimes even clothes, always discreetly. And you, Mr. John Peter, Elizabeth addressed the businessman. Mrs. Elizabeth, my store has always done well. But lately I've been wondering what's the point of making money if I don't help anyone with it. When I read about your work, I understood this was my chance to do something truly important. And you, Anne-Marie? I work with needy families every day at the City Hall. I know exactly what the needs are, and I know many families that could be helped. Plus, I can help identify new cases without raising suspicion. Elizabeth spoke with the 3 of them for over 2 hours, asking detailed questions about their motivations, time availability, and most importantly, their commitment to discretion. If I accept you as volunteers, do you agree to some basic rules? She asked. Of course, when they replied in unison. First rule, no one can know each other's identities beyond what's necessary for the work. You will not become friends. You will not visit each other's homes. You will not comment about the project with family or friends. We agree. Second rule, all families helped must remain unaware of who helps them. No signed notes, no introducing yourselves, no forming personal bonds. We agree. Third rule, if any of you want to leave the project, you can leave at any time, but you can never tell anyone what you saw or did here. We agree. Final rule, I remain the coordinator. All important decisions go through me. Just because we have more people doesn't mean it will turn into a mess. Perfect, Mrs. Elizabeth. Elizabeth looked at the 4 young people before her and felt an emotion she hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time in 20 years, she was not alone in her mission. Then it's decided. Let's start working together. The group met the following Saturday to plan the project's expansion. Elizabeth showed her family registration files, explained how she mapped the needs, and detailed her distribution logistics. "Mrs. Elizabeth, with the money we've already raised, we can help at least 200 families this year," calculated John Peter. "And I can identify more families in need through the City Hall records," added Anne-Marie. "I can coordinate a more efficient distribution system using some contacts I have," offered Mrs. Martha. Elizabeth was impressed with the professionalism and dedication of the new volunteers. "But we must always keep in mind that we cannot be discovered," she insisted. "If anyone finds out who we are, we lose the essence of the project." "We understand perfectly," said Anne-Marie. "In fact, I can help create distribution systems that further protect our anonymity." Over the next few days, the group worked to organize what Elizabeth began calling Angel Operation. With more people and more resources, they could map families in neighboring towns, diversify the types of aid, and create a more detailed monitoring system. John Peter secured agreements with suppliers to buy firewood, blankets, and basic food baskets at a discount. Anne-Marie created a discrete system to identify families in need. Mrs. Martha organized a distribution schedule that would reduce the risk of being discovered. Lucas continued managing donations and communication with the press. Within 2 weeks, Angel Operation was running like a well-structured company, but completely invisible to the general public. "Mrs. Elizabeth, you need to see this," said Lucas on a Thursday, showing a spreadsheet with the project's numbers. "What is it?" "In 1 month, we've raised $12,000 in donations. We've registered 120 families who need help for the winter. And more, 3 business owners have offered to make fixed monthly donations." "That's unbelievable. And there's more." "The mayor approached me wanting to know if there's any way for the city to officially support the project. And what did you say?" "That I would consult the person in charge. What do you think?" Elizabeth thought for a few minutes. "If the city supports us, won't we lose our anonymity?" "Not necessarily. We can create an agreement where the City Hall contributes financially, but does not participate in the execution, nor has access to the family's data. And what would be the advantage? Greater resources and legal protection. With the official support of the City Hall, no one will question your right to store firewood or accuse you of irregular activity anymore. The prospect of having official support would definitively solve Elizabeth's problems with the municipal inspector and give credibility to the project." "All right, you can negotiate with the mayor." In early July, Angel Operation had become a project officially recognized by the City Hall of Aspen, yet it still maintained complete anonymity about its executors. The mayor announced at a press conference that the city would financially support the initiative to distribute firewood to needy families. "It is an honor for our city to have such generous and organized people working to help those most in need," declared the mayor. "Even without knowing the identity of these individuals, we recognize the importance of the work they do." Elizabeth watched the press conference on television and for the first time in months felt completely at ease. Her project was protected, recognized, and expanded, but she remained anonymous. A week later, David called with news. "Mum, did you see that the City Hall of Aspen is going to support that firewood distribution project?" "I did. Very interesting. You know what I thought? I thought it would be perfect if you got involved as a volunteer in that project. It would be a beautiful social activity for you." Elizabeth could barely contain her laughter. "You think I should volunteer?" "I think it would be perfect for you. It would give you purpose, put you in touch with interesting people, and you'd be doing something truly useful." "And if I got involved in this project, would you stop pressuring me to move to New York?" "If you were involved in something like that, I'd be sure you were well and had your head on straight. I wouldn't worry anymore." "Then it's settled. I will get involved in this firewood distribution project." "Really, Mum? That's great. You'll see how useful and happy you'll feel helping others." Elizabeth hung up the phone, smiling. After months of anguish, she had found a way to keep her project, expand its impact, and even win her son's approval, all without revealing that for 20 years she had been exactly the person he thought she should become. By the end of July, Angel Operation was already distributing aid to over 300 families in Aspen and 4 neighboring towns. The project had grown so much that Elizabeth needed to hire 2 more trusted volunteers to handle the logistics. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now, continuing. One day, while organizing the family lists for the next distribution, Elizabeth received an unexpected visit. It was Jennifer Thompson, accompanied by a grey-haired lady. "Mrs. Elizabeth, this is my mother-in-law, Mrs. Carroll. She has a story to tell you." Carroll approached Elizabeth with eyes full of tears. "Mrs. Elizabeth, you helped my family 15 years ago. My husband had broken his leg and couldn't work. We had 3 grandchildren living with us because our daughter had passed away. We couldn't afford to buy firewood." Elizabeth vaguely remembered the family. "One morning we found firewood at our door with a note saying, 'To warm the heart.' My husband said it was a miracle from God. That firewood kept us warm all winter, but more than that, it gave us hope." "It's good to know it helped," Elizabeth replied, moved. "You don't know the rest of the story. The following year, my husband was better and working. Since we no longer needed help, we decided to use the money we would have spent on firewood to help another family. We looked for a family in need and bought firewood for them." Elizabeth was surprised. "You did that?" "Yes. And you know what we discovered? That helping others gives more pleasure than receiving help. In the 3rd year, besides helping that family, we helped 2 more. In the 4th year, we organized a group of neighbors to help 10 families. Carol stopped to wipe her tears. "Mrs. Elizabeth, today our group helps more than 50 families a year. It all started with that firewood you left at our door 15 years ago." Elizabeth was deeply moved. She had never imagined her help could generate such a wide network of solidarity. "We want you to know that there are at least 6 groups like ours in towns in the region. They all started with families you helped, who decided to help others afterward." "How do you know it was me?" "Because over the years we've been talking among ourselves and discovered that several families had similar stories. They all received firewood with identical notes, all at the same time of year, all when they were going through specific hardships. And they all remembered talking to a kind lady a few days before receiving the firewood." Elizabeth realized that, without knowing it, she had created a solidarity network much larger than she imagined. "How many families do you think are helped today because of groups that started this way?" "More than 200 a year," answered Jennifer, "and that's just among the families we've discovered. There could be many more." The revelation was a positive shock for Elizabeth. For 20 years, she thought she was helping families individually. In reality, she was planting seeds of solidarity that sprouted into independent projects throughout the region. "There's something we'd like to propose to you," said Carol. "What?" "What if we created an official network of all these groups, keeping each group anonymous, but coordinating efforts to avoid duplicating help and to cover families no group is currently serving?" The idea of coordinating a regional network for anonymous aid fascinated Elizabeth. How would it work? Each group would remain independent and anonymous, but there would be an information hub, also anonymous, that would map all the families served to avoid overlap and identify gaps. And who would coordinate this hub? "We thought it could be the angel operation that's been in the news," suggested Jennifer with a knowing smile. Elizabeth laughed at the irony. She would be the anonymous coordinator of a network created by people she had anonymously helped, who now knew her identity but kept the secret. "I accept coordinating this network." In the following weeks, Elizabeth worked tirelessly to structure the Regional Anonymous Angels Network. With Lucas's help and that of the other volunteers, she created a communication system that allowed groups to exchange information without revealing identities. By August, the network was already coordinating 12 independent groups that together served more than 400 families in 15 towns in the region. Elizabeth had become, without anyone knowing, the coordinator of the largest anonymous solidarity network in the interior of New York. One day, Lucas appeared at Elizabeth's house with an unexpected proposal. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I received a very interesting invitation." "What?" "The National Network heard about the Angel Operation story and wants to do a special feature for the Sunday special program." Elizabeth felt her heart race. "And what did you say?" "That I needed to consult the people involved, but Mrs. Elizabeth, it would be an incredible opportunity to inspire other cities to create similar projects. But we can't appear on television. You don't have to. We can do the feature in a way that no one is identified. Cameras filming from a distance, altered voices, faces covered. The important thing was to tell the project's story. Elizabeth considered the proposal. A national feature would give visibility to the work and could inspire thousands of people to help their communities. What if many people discover my identity? We will take every precaution to ensure that doesn't happen. And even if some people find out, by this point, the project is already so large and structured that it no longer depends solely on you. That's true. Besides, Mrs. Elizabeth, you have already proven it's possible to do extraordinary social work while maintaining anonymity. Even if your identity were revealed, no one could criticize what you have done. Elizabeth considered all aspects of the proposal. If I accept, do you guarantee my identity will be protected? We guarantee it. Then I accept. The recording for the Sunday special feature was done in September. The national network crew filmed scenes of firewood distribution, interviewed assisted families, without revealing the volunteers' identities, and showed the regional scale the project had reached. Elizabeth participated in the main interview with an altered voice and her face covered by shadows. She spoke about the 20 years of work, the importance of anonymity, and how small gestures can generate great transformations. Why do you think it's important to maintain anonymity? Asked the reporter. Because when you help anonymously, you are truly helping. You are not helping to receive recognition, to feel important, to appear on television. You are helping because it's the right thing to do. And what is the practical difference of that? Those who receive anonymous help receive dignity along with it. They don't owe anyone a favor. They don't need to say thank you. They aren't embarrassed. It's as if the community itself were taking care of them, without faces, without names, just with love. The feature aired on a Sunday night in October. Elizabeth watched at home, accompanied by Lucas and the other volunteers from the first team. Mrs. Elizabeth, you made history, said Mrs. Martha when the feature ended. We made history, corrected Elizabeth. Without you all, I would never have gotten this far. The following Monday, Lucas received over 100 calls from people across the country wanting to know how to create similar projects in their cities. The newspaper's website registered thousands of hits from people interested in the anonymous angel methodology. Within a week, Elizabeth was receiving letters from people in 20 U.S. states asking for guidance to create anonymous solidarity networks. She decided to create a basic manual with the learnings from her 20 years of experience. Lucas, I'm going to write a guide, teaching how other people can do anonymous social work in their communities, she announced. What a fantastic idea. We can publish it on the newspaper's website. Elizabeth spent 2 weeks writing the Anonymous Angel Manual. The 20-page document taught how to discreetly identify families in need, how to organize networks of anonymous volunteers, how to establish safe distribution systems, and how to maintain projects sustainably in the long term. The manual went viral on the internet. Within 2 months, more than 50 U.S. cities had created their own angel operations based on Elizabeth's guidance. David called on a Tuesday in November with an enthusiasm Elizabeth hadn't heard in years. Mom, did you see that Sunday special feature about the woman who distributes firewood? Yes, I did, son. And did you see that a manual came out teaching how to do anonymous social work? I saw that too. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to organize a project like that here in New York. I've already talked to some entrepreneur friends, and we're going to create a network to help needy families on the outskirts. Elizabeth smiled. What a wonderful idea, David. Mom, I was thinking, what if you came to New York to help me organize this project? You understand these social work things. I don't need to go to New York to help you, son. I can guide you over the phone. But it would be much better if you were here. David, I am very well here in Aspen. I have my projects, my commitments. I don't want to move. What projects do you have there? Elizabeth took a deep breath. The time had come to reveal at least part of the truth. David, remember when you said I should get involved in the city's firewood distribution project? Of course. Well, I got involved. I've been a volunteer in the project for a few months. Really, that's great, Mom, and how is it going? Very rewarding. In fact, I'm one of the project coordinators. Wow, Mom, why didn't you tell me before? Because we wanted to be sure everything would work well before making it public. David was silent for a few seconds. Mum, can I confess something? Of course. I was wrong about you. I thought you were getting a bit disconnected from things because of that whole Firewood story. But now I understand you always knew what you were doing. And do you understand why it's important for me to keep living here? I understand perfectly. You're doing important work in your community. It would be selfish of me to want to take you away from there. Elizabeth felt immense happiness. Finally, David understood and supported her life in Aspen. Son, can I give you some guidance on how to set up the project there in New York? Of course. It would be great to have the experience of someone who's making it work. During the following weeks, Elizabeth guided David in creating Angel Operation New York. He gathered a group of businessmen and started distributing food baskets, blankets, and even assistance with paying electricity bills for needy families on the outskirts. Mum, now I understand why you get so excited talking about this work, said David in a call. The feeling of helping someone without expecting anything in return is indescribable. That's why I've been doing this for so many years, son. For so many years? I thought you had started recently. Elizabeth realized she had said too much. Well, it feels like much longer because the work is so intense. In December, Elizabeth was preparing the largest firewood distribution operation in the region's history. With resources from the Regional Anonymous Angels Network, official support from 15 city halls, and hundreds of volunteers, they would assist over 1,000 families during the winter. On the eve of the big distribution, Elizabeth was at home organizing the final lists when she received a call from Lucas. Mrs. Elizabeth, there's a problem. What problem? The national network wants to do a follow-up story on the project, showing how it has grown since the first report, and they want to interview you personally without anonymity. But why? Because they found out you are the coordinator of everything. Someone must have told them. Elizabeth felt her world crumbling. After 20 years of anonymity, her identity was about to be revealed nationally. How did they find out? I don't know. But they already have a crew on their way to Aspen. What now? We have two options. Either you give the interview publicly admitting you are the creator of the project, or you disappear for a few days until they give up. Elizabeth thought quickly. If she disappeared, it would harm the big distribution operation scheduled for the next day. Over 1,000 families would be left without help because of her fear of exposure. Lucas, if I give the interview, will the project keep working? It will. In fact, it will probably grow even more. And the families I've helped for years, will they be embarrassed? Mrs. Elizabeth, by now they already know they are part of something bigger. And many of them have already discovered who you are and continue participating normally. Elizabeth realized that perhaps it was time to accept that her project had grown beyond her ability to control every aspect. All right, I'll give the interview. The next morning, a team from the national network was at Elizabeth's door. For the first time in 20 years, she would speak publicly about her work. The reporter interviewed her in the backyard, next to the stacks of firewood that had caused so much controversy in the past and were now symbols of solidarity. Mrs. Elizabeth, why did you decide to start this work? Was the first question. When my husband died, I felt lost. He was a lumberjack, and our house was full of wood. The first winter without him, I decided to give that wood to a family in need. And I discovered that helping others helped me deal with the pain of loss. And how did it become this gigantic project? Gradually. Each year I helped more families. I learned to better identify who needed help. I created more efficient methods. I never imagined it would turn into all this. Why maintain anonymity for so long? Because anonymity preserves the dignity of those who receive help and purifies the intention of those who help. When you help anonymously, you are sure you are doing it for the right reason. And now that your identity has been revealed, what changes? I hope nothing changes in essence. I will continue coordinating the projects. I will continue working so that more and more families are assisted. The difference is that now I can inspire other people to do the same more directly. The story aired on a Thursday night. Elizabeth watched, surrounded by all the volunteers from the region's projects, by dozens of people she had helped over the years, and by neighbors who finally understood the reason for so much firewood stockpile. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Barbara, the neighbor who always criticized the wood accumulation, "I need to apologize. I thought you were getting a bit, I understand, Barbara. The appearances really were strange. But now I understand why you were always so reserved about everything, and I want to help with the project. You will be very welcome." David arrived from New York the next day to hug his mother. "Mom, I can't believe you did all this without telling me." "Would you have understood at the time?" David thought for a few seconds. "Probably not. I would have thought it was a waste of money and tried to convince you to stop. That's why I kept it a secret. But now I understand, and I am very proud. My mother is a national heroine." "I'm not a heroine, David. I'm just a woman who found purpose by helping others." The revelation of Elizabeth's identity brought consequences she hadn't imagined. In 1 week, she received invitations to speak at social assistance conferences, universities, and companies. Publishers wanted to publish the story of her life. Politicians sought her out to ask for advice on social policies. "Lucas, this is getting too big," said Elizabeth one morning, looking at a pile of invitations and proposals. "You are becoming a national symbol of solidarity, Mrs. Elizabeth. But I don't want to be a symbol. I want to continue helping needy families. Why can't you do both, continue coordinating the regional projects and also inspire other people across the entire country?" Elizabeth considered the suggestion. "Do you think I can? With the structure we have today, the projects run even without you being present all the time. And if you can inspire the creation of similar projects in 100 cities, you will help many more families than if you stay only here." Lucas's logic made sense. "All right, I will accept some speaking invitations, but only those that can truly result in new projects." In the following months, Elizabeth traveled throughout Brazil, telling her story and teaching methodologies for anonymous social work. Each lecture resulted in the creation of at least one new project in the visited city. By March of the following year, there were angel operations in over 200 Brazilian cities. Elizabeth had inadvertently become the leader of a national solidarity movement. One April morning, she was at home organizing reports from the regional projects when she received a visit that moved her deeply. It was Gabriel, a 16-year-old boy, accompanied by his parents. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said the boy's mother, "I needed you to meet my son." "Hello, Gabriel." "Mrs. Elizabeth, when I was 5, my family went through very difficult times. My father lost his job. We didn't have money even for food, let alone for firewood." Elizabeth paid attention to the story she had heard so many times, but which never failed to move her. "One morning we found firewood at our door. My mother cried with joy. I asked her who had brought it, and she said it must have been an angel. How beautiful. Since then, I wanted to be like the angel who helped our family. I studied hard, got a scholarship, and now I'm about to graduate in social work. I want to dedicate my life to helping families like you helped ours." Elizabeth felt tears in her eyes. "Gabriel, you don't need to be like me. You need to be yourself, using your own talents to help others." "I know, but I want you to know that that firewood didn't just warm our house. It warmed my heart and gave me direction for my entire life." That conversation made Elizabeth reflect on the true impact of her work. It wasn't just the 1,500 families she helped directly each year. It was the hundreds of people who, inspired by the help they received, dedicated their lives to helping others. It was the projects created in other cities, the volunteers trained, the solidarity networks established. In June, Elizabeth received the title of Honorary Citizen of Aspen. At the award ceremony, the mayor gave an emotional speech. Mrs. Elizabeth didn't just warm homes during the harsh winters of our region. She warmed hearts, inspired vocations, created a culture of solidarity that has spread throughout the country. Elizabeth took the stage to receive the honor. She looked at the audience and saw hundreds of people who had in some way been touched by her work. Volunteers from the projects, families she had helped, young people inspired by her story. authorities who supported the initiatives. "When I started this work 21 years ago," she said into the microphone, "I only wanted to honor my husband's memory and find purpose for my life after losing him. I never imagined that that first pile of firewood taken to a family in need would turn into all this." The audience applauded. "But I learned an important lesson. When you truly help someone, you're not just solving an immediate problem. You're planting a seed of kindness that can bear fruit for generations." Elizabeth looked at Gabriel, who was in the front row. "Today, there are young people graduating in social professions because they were inspired by help they received as children. There are business people using their resources to create solidarity projects because they saw the impact it can have. There are entire families dedicating time to help other families because one day they received anonymous help." More applause. "What I did wasn't special, it was just persistent. Anyone can identify needs in their community and act to meet them. Anyone can dedicate part of what they have, money, time, talent, to improve the lives of others." Elizabeth paused and looked at Lucas, who was photographing the ceremony for the newspaper. "And anyone can do this while maintaining humility and anonymity, ensuring that those who receive help preserve their dignity and that those who offer help maintain the purity of their intentions." After finishing her speech, Elizabeth received a standing ovation that lasted over 5 minutes. She stepped down from the stage, emotional, but with a sense of duty fulfilled. David was waiting for her at the exit of the municipal theatre. "Mum, I'm so proud of you." "Thank you, son. And I want you to know that the New York project is going very well. We've already assisted over 300 families. That's wonderful. And you know what else? My children, your grandchildren, are participating as volunteers. They get so excited when we go to distribute food baskets." Elizabeth smiled. The seed she had planted was sprouting even in the 3rd generation of her own family. "David, can I confess something to you?" "Of course." "When you threatened to put me in a home or force me to move to New York, I was desperate. Not because I didn't want to live with you, but because I couldn't abandon the families that depended on me. I can imagine, Mom. If I had known back then what I was trying to prevent, you did what you thought was best with the information you had. I can't blame you for that. But now I understand why that firewood was so important to you. Each log represented a family that would be warmed, a child who wouldn't suffer from the cold." "Exactly. And I also understand why you couldn't explain it at the time. If you had told me about the project, you would have lost the anonymity that was essential for it to work." Elizabeth hugged her son. "You've grown so much, David, not just as a professional but as a person. Seeing you coordinate a social project makes me prouder than any tribute I could receive." At the end of the year, Elizabeth took stock of what her small project had become. The national network of angel operations was assisting over 10,000 families in 300 cities. Hundreds of young people had chosen social professions inspired by the stories from the projects. Dozens of companies had created permanent social responsibility programs. More important than the numbers was the change in mindset she perceived in people. The concept of anonymous help had become popular. More and more people were making donations without seeking recognition, discreetly helping neighbors, creating quiet initiatives of solidarity. One December night, Elizabeth was in the backyard of her house, observing the stacks of firewood organized for distribution the following winter. Lucas appeared for a visit. "Mrs. Elizabeth, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you regret losing your anonymity?" Elizabeth thought for a long moment. "Sometimes I miss the time when I could work without anyone knowing. There was something magical about being completely invisible, about knowing I was making a difference without anyone suspecting. But I also see that revealing my identity multiplied the impact of the work 1,000-fold. Today, the families I help directly are just a small part of the good this entire movement is generating. And what is your greatest satisfaction today? It's knowing that I'm no longer indispensable. The movement has grown so much that it would function perfectly even if I stopped completely. That means it will continue to exist long after I'm gone." Lucas smiled. "Mrs. Elizabeth, you've created something immortal. I didn't create it alone. All of you, The volunteers, the families who were inspired and started helping other families, the young people who chose social professions. Everyone created this together. That night, as she prepared for bed, Elizabeth looked out her window at her backyard. The stacks of firewood that were once the subject of neighbors' mockery were now national symbols of solidarity. Journalists regularly visited her home to photograph the famous firewood of Mrs. Elizabeth. Tourists made a point of passing by the street to see the place where it all began, but to her, those logs remained what they always were, promises that no family would need to suffer through the cold during winter. Every piece of wood stacked there represented warmth, protection, care, practical love transformed into concrete action. Elizabeth lay down thinking of Richard, her lumberjack husband who had passed away 21 years earlier. She had honored his memory in a way he could never have imagined. His work of cutting and processing wood had become her work of warming hearts and inspiring vocations. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up early as she always did. She had her simple coffee, put on work clothes, and went to the backyard to organize more firewood. At 63 years old, after becoming a national symbol, she continued doing exactly what she had done for 2 decades, preparing wood to warm families during winter. The difference was that now she no longer worked alone. Mrs. Martha arrived at 7 o'clock to help with the organization. John Peter showed up at 8 with a trailer of new firewood he had bought at a discount. Anne-Marie brought the updated lists of families who would need help. Lucas came with the week's donation reports. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Anne-Marie, "we have 200 new families registered for this winter. Do we have the resources to help them all?" asked Elizabeth. "We have resources to help 1,200 families," replied John Peter. "Donations increased a lot after your national interview." Elizabeth smiled. The more people knew about the work, the more families could be helped. At 9 o'clock, the newer volunteers began to arrive. Young students, retirees with free time, professionals who dedicated a few Saturdays a month to the project. Within 2 hours, there were over 20 people working in Elizabeth's backyard. "It's amazing how this has grown," commented Mrs. Martha. "And it grew while keeping its essence," replied Elizabeth. "All these people are here for the right reason, to help those in need." During lunch, Elizabeth received a call from Washington. It was an advisor from the Department of Social Development. "Mrs. Elizabeth, the Secretary would like to speak with you about the possibility of turning the Angel Operation methodology into a national public policy." "How so?" "The federal government wants to create a program based on the model you developed. It would be a way to expand the work to the entire national territory." Elizabeth was silent for a few seconds. "I need to think about this. Can I talk with my team and give an answer next week? Of course, the Secretary awaits your position." In the afternoon, Elizabeth gathered the main volunteers to discuss the government's proposal. "What do you all think?" she asked. "It would be amazing to expand to the entire country," said Anne-Marie. "But would the government be able to maintain the essence of the anonymous work?" questioned Lucas. "And wouldn't it become too bureaucratic?" added John Peter. "These are valid concerns," agreed Elizabeth, "but we also need to think that it would be an opportunity to help millions of families." The discussion went on for 2 hours. They analyzed pros and cons, discussed ways to maintain the quality of the work on a national scale, considered the risks of distorting the original project. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Mrs. Martha, "what is your instinct about this?" "My instinct says we should try. Even if there are risks, even if it's not perfect, it's worth trying to help as many families as possible." "Then let's move forward," they all agreed. A week later, Elizabeth was in Washington for a meeting with the Secretary of Social Development. She presented a detailed plan on how to adapt the methodology of the Angel operations for a national program. "Mr. Secretary, the key to success lies in 3 principles: anonymity of the donors, discretion in delivering the aid, and a focus on the real needs of the families," explained Elizabeth. "And how do we guarantee that on a national scale?" "By creating a decentralized network. Each municipality would have its own Angel operation, coordinated locally but following standardized national guidelines. And the anonymity. The volunteers can be anonymous to the families they assist, but they need to be known to the public authorities for organizational and accountability purposes. The Secretary approved the proposal. In 6 months, the National Anonymous Angel Program would be officially launched. Elizabeth returned to Aspen with a mixed feeling of pride and responsibility. Her small project of distributing firewood to needy families had become national public policy. "Mum," said David in a phone call, "did you see the program is going to be launched officially on your birthday?" "Yes, I did. What an interesting coincidence." "It's not a coincidence. The Secretary chose the date on purpose as a tribute to you." "How kind. Mum, can I make a confession?" "Of course. 2 years ago, when I threatened to have you committed because of the firewood, I thought I was protecting you. Today I realize I was actually trying to stop you from being who you really are. David, you are my son, and I know you always wanted what's best for me. But now I understand that sometimes protecting someone means letting the person be free to follow their purpose, even if we don't fully understand that purpose. Did you learn that by helping needy families in New York? I learned it by seeing how resilient you were all these years, by seeing how you kept to your mission, even when everyone doubted you." Elizabeth was moved by her son's words. "David, seeing you coordinate a social project is the greatest joy of my life, better than any tribute or recognition. I learned from the best teacher." On the day of the official launch of the National Anonymous Angel Program, Elizabeth was at the Executive Mansion next to the President of the United States. The ceremony was attended by governors, mayors, business leaders, and social leaders from across the country. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said the President in his speech, "you prove that an ordinary person, with determination and love for their neighbor, can transform the reality of an entire country." The audience gave a standing ovation. The program we launched today is not just public policy. It is the recognition that the best of America is in people like Mrs. Elizabeth, who dedicate their lives to caring for one another. After the ceremony, Elizabeth was surrounded by journalists from across the country. "Mrs. Elizabeth, how do you feel knowing your project will help millions of families? I feel grateful to have lived long enough to see this happen. What is your greatest hope for the national program?" "That it inspires every American to look around and identify a way to help their community. It doesn't have to be firewood. It could be food, clothing, tutoring for children, companionship for the elderly. The important thing is to act." "And what is your greatest fear?" "That people think that because there is an official program, they no longer need to help individually. The national program is important, but it will never replace the direct solidarity between neighbors, between people in the same community." That evening, Elizabeth had dinner with David at a restaurant in Washington. "Mom, have you achieved all your dreams?" "Actually, David, I never dreamed of all this. My dreams were much smaller, just to ensure a few families didn't suffer from the cold during winter. And now? Now I realize that God used my small dreams to accomplish something much greater. It's as if I planted a tiny seed and it turned into a forest. And what are your plans for the future? To keep doing exactly what I've always done, taking care of the families in my region. Let other people handle the national program, while I take care of what I do best. But will you continue giving lectures, inspiring other people? I'll still give a few lectures, but my heart is in Aspen, organizing firewood, visiting families, coordinating volunteers." David smiled. "Mum, you are a very special person. You could be traveling the world, giving interviews, receiving honors, but you prefer to keep working anonymously. That's where I feel useful, David. And that's where Richard would have wanted me to be." Elizabeth returned home the next day. Upon arriving, she found her backyard full of volunteers organizing firewood for the winter distribution. There were at least 30 people working, including several young people she didn't know. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Lucas, "these are college students who came from San Jose to help. And why did they come? Because they watched your lectures and want to learn hands-on how to do social work." Elizabeth spoke with the college students. They all had similar stories. They had been inspired by her journey and wanted to dedicate part of their lives to social work. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Jessica, a psychology student, "I want to do my thesis on anonymous aid methodology." And I want to create a university outreach project based on the angel operation model, added Ryan, a business student. Elizabeth realized she had formed a new generation of people committed to solidarity. You can stay here as many days as you want to learn, but there's one condition. When you return to your cities, you have to create local projects. Deal, they replied in unison. During that week, Elizabeth taught the students all the practical details of her work: how to identify families in need, how to organize distribution systems, how to keep efficient records, how to recruit and train volunteers. The most important part, she explained, is to never forget that behind every file, every registration, every statistic, there is a real family with real people who have a name, a story, dreams, and difficulties. On Friday, the students said goodbye, promising to stay in touch and send reports on the projects they would create. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Jessica, "you changed my life. I was going to do clinical psychology, but now I want to work in community psychology." "And I was going to work for multinational companies," said Ryan, "but now I want to manage social projects." Elizabeth smiled, seeing how her story continued to influence young people's career choices. On Saturday, she woke up early as always and went to the backyard. She was alone for the first time in weeks. She sat on a pile of firewood and watched the street activity. Mrs. Barbara, the neighbor, appeared at the fence. "Good morning, Elizabeth." "Good morning, Barbara. Can I confess something?" "Of course." "I feel ashamed for speaking ill of you because of this firewood." "If I had known—" "Barbara, you couldn't have known, and even if you had, it wouldn't have changed my work. But it would have changed my attitude. I could have helped instead of just criticizing." "You can help now." "That's true. In fact, I want to apply to be an official volunteer for the project." Elizabeth smiled. "You will be very welcome, Barbara." That afternoon, Elizabeth received a visit from a family she didn't know. A couple around 40 years old with 2 teenage children. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said the man, "we live in Springfield and came here to thank you in person." "Thank me for what?" "You don't remember us, but 12 years ago you helped our family. My wife was hospitalized. I had lost my job. We had no way to buy firewood." Elizabeth struggled to remember, but she had helped so many families over the years. "One morning we found firewood at our door," the woman continued. "Back then, we didn't know who had helped. We only found out now, seeing your interviews on television." "It's so good to know I helped," said Elizabeth. "You don't know what happened after," said the eldest son. "That firewood kept us warm the entire winter while Mom was recovering. But more than that, it taught us the value of solidarity." "How so?" "The next year, when our situation improved, we decided to help another family in the same way. We bought firewood and took it anonymously to a family that was struggling. And in the 3rd year, we helped 2 families," continued the younger son. "Today," said the father, "our family helps 10 families a year during the winter, and not just with firewood, also with food, clothing, medicine." "And you know what else?" added the mother. "Our children grew up seeing this, and today they organize solidarity campaigns at their school." Elizabeth was moved hearing another story of how her help had multiplied over the years. "We want you to note," said the father, "that the firewood you gave us 12 years ago has already turned into help for over 100 families over these years." "How so?" "Because every family we helped was inspired and started helping others too. It became a network, and it all started with those logs you left at our door." That conversation made Elizabeth reflect on something she had never fully considered: the multiplier effect of every act of kindness. She always thought she was helping families individually, but in reality, she was creating waves of solidarity that spread across generations. On Sunday, Elizabeth was at church when the priest mentioned her work during the sermon. "Our community has the privilege of sheltering a person who has dedicated her life to putting Christ's teachings into practice," said the priest. "Mrs. Elizabeth teaches us that true charity is that which preserves the dignity of the receiver and purifies the heart of the giver." After Mass, several people approached Elizabeth, offering help for the projects. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said a gentleman she didn't know, I have a farm and can donate wood for the project. And I have a truck and can help with transportation, offered another. My daughter studies nutrition and can help put together balanced food baskets for the families, said a lady. Elizabeth realized she had awakened in the community a collective desire to help that didn't exist before. On Monday, Lucas appeared with a new proposal. Mrs. Elizabeth, we've received a very special invitation. What? The National University wants to create a chair in your name. The Elizabeth Carter Chair of Community Solidarity. It would be to research and teach social work methodologies based on your methods. And what does that mean? It means university professors will study your work, create new knowledge based on your experience, and train professionals using your methodology. Elizabeth was surprised by the proposal. My work becomes a college subject? It does. And not just at NU. There are already 5 universities wanting to create courses based on the Elizabeth Carter methodology. That is a very great responsibility, Lucas. But think of the positive impact. Imagine hundreds of social workers, psychologists, administrators graduating with specific knowledge on how to organize efficient and respectful solidarity projects. Elizabeth considered the proposal. I accept, but on one condition. What? I want to participate in creating the curriculum. I want to ensure the students learn not just the techniques, but especially the values behind the work. Perfect. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth was at the National University in a meeting with deans, professors, and researchers to discuss the creation of the chair. Professor Elizabeth, said the dean, he insisted on calling her that, what is the most important aspect students should learn? That social work is not about the helper feeling good about themselves. It's about the person receiving help regaining their autonomy and dignity. How so? When you help someone in a way that makes them dependent on your help, you are not truly helping. You are creating a power dynamic where you are superior and they are inferior. And how to avoid that? By helping in a way that the person maintains their self-esteem, their privacy, their hope that the difficulty is temporary, and whenever possible, creating conditions so they can also help others in the future. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Elizabeth shared insights from 22 years of practical experience, answered questions about specific cases, and suggested practical exercises for future students. Professor Elizabeth, said a psychology professor, you have developed knowledge that isn't in any book, because I learned by doing, making mistakes, trying again. Academia can systematize this knowledge and make it more accessible to others. Exactly. That's what we want to do with the chair. Elizabeth returned to Aspen in the late afternoon. During the trip, she thought about the irony of the situation. A woman who had only studied up to high school now had her name on a university chair. At home, she found David waiting with a surprise. Mum, I brought your grandchildren to see the project. Her 2 grandchildren, 8 and 10 years old, were in the backyard playing among the piles of firewood. Grandma, said the older one, Dad told me you're famous because you help poor people. I'm not famous, my love. I just do what I believe is right. And can I help too? Of course. You can help organize the firewood by size. The children were excited about the task. Elizabeth watched her grandchildren working and thought about how important it was to pass on values of solidarity from an early age. Grandma, said the younger one, why do you give firewood to people you don't know? Because when it's cold, everyone deserves to be warm, regardless of who they are or if we know them. And why don't you tell them your name? Because sometimes it's more beautiful to help without expecting thanks. It's helping because it's right, not because we'll get something in return. The children accepted the explanation naturally, as if it were obvious that people should help each other. That evening, during dinner, Elizabeth talked with David about the future of the projects. David, I'm 64. I need to start thinking about how to ensure the work continues when I can no longer coordinate it. Mum, you're healthy enough to work for many more years. I hope so, but it's my responsibility to prepare a proper transition. And how do you plan to do that? First, I need to train more qualified regional coordinators. Second, I need to document all the processes and methodologies. Third, I need to ensure the funding is sustainable in the long term. I can help with the strategic planning and financial sustainability part. That would be great, David. They spent the rest of the night discussing plans to institutionalize the projects so they could function independently of Elizabeth. The following month, Elizabeth started an intensive training program for new coordinators. Over 3 weekends, she trained 20 people from different regions to replicate her methodology. The most important rule, she told the trainees, is to never lose sight of the fact that we are dealing with people, not numbers. Every family has its own story, its specific needs, its dignity that must be preserved. The participants took detailed notes, asked practical questions, and simulated real situations. "Mrs. Elizabeth," asked one of the participants, "how do you manage to stay motivated after so many years of doing the same work?" "Because it's never the same work. Every family is unique. Every winter brings different challenges. Every year I need to learn new things. And most importantly, because I see the result of the work in people's lives." What was the most rewarding moment of these 22 years? Elizabeth thought for a few minutes. It wasn't a specific moment. It was realizing that the work created a culture of solidarity that spread far beyond what I ever imagined. Today there are people helping others in places I don't even know, inspired by our methodology. At the end of the training, the 20 coordinators committed to creating projects in their regions and maintaining regular contact with Elizabeth to exchange experiences. In December of that year, Elizabeth received an impressive report. The national network of projects inspired by her work was already serving more than 50,000 families in 600 cities. "Lucas," she said, "this is bigger than many official public policies." It's the power of multiplication, Mrs. Elizabeth. One person inspires 2, who inspire 4, who inspire 8. And the most beautiful part is that each project maintains the essence of the work. Anonymity, respect, focus on the real needs of the families. Because you trained the coordinators well, and they are training the volunteers well. Elizabeth smiled. Her greatest achievement wasn't the numbers, but having managed to replicate the values and methodology on a large scale without losing quality. On Christmas Day that year, Elizabeth received thank you cards from families all over Brazil. Hundreds of letters telling how local projects inspired by her work had transformed the lives of people in need. One letter in particular moved her. It was from a 12-year-old girl from Miami. "Mrs. Elizabeth, my name is Bethany. Last year my family went through a lot of hardship when my father lost his job. A group of people in our city, inspired by you, helped us with food and blankets during the difficult months. Now my father has a new job, and I want to study to be a social worker like you when I grow up. Thank you for teaching people to help with kindness." Elizabeth kept that letter with the photos of Richard. It was proof that her work was generating callings in children she didn't even know, in places she had never been. On New Year's Eve, Elizabeth took stock of everything that had happened since the city inspector knocked on her door, threatening to fine her for accumulating firewood. In less than 2 years, she had gone from complete anonymity to becoming a national reference in solidarity. But what made her most proud wasn't the fame or the recognition. It was knowing that thousands of families were spending the winter warm thanks to her work and the hundreds of volunteers inspired by her story. "Richard," she said, looking at her husband's photo, "I think I've managed to honor your memory in a way that would make you proud." That night, Elizabeth slept with a sense of duty fulfilled. At 64, she had transformed a personal pain into a life purpose, a simple gesture into a national movement, a pile of firewood into a symbol of hope. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story of solidarity. Do you believe small gestures can really transform entire communities? Leave your opinion in the comments and share if you know someone like Mrs. Elizabeth. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories.